everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is an animator and the cartoonist behind comics like Homunculus, Harvest, and the just-released Cuckoo at ShortBox. It's Joe Sparrow. Thanks for coming on, Joe.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So we're recording this on a weekend because day jobs are crazy, especially when you work in animation, I imagine. How was the week in animation?
It was good. It's kind of getting busier, but also getting slightly less stressful. I started off a new job in animation a few weeks ago, and it's in a role that I'm slightly less familiar with. Normally for the last few years, I've been doing mostly design roles, so like character design, a little bit background design as well. But this one is kind of in the hierarchy of a studio. This is like one rung above that, like an art director role. So rather than designing stuff myself, I'm more getting other people to design the stuff and directing them and stuff, which has been it's been fine so far. I was a little bit nervous about it, but also I spoke to a lot of friends about it, and I had a lot of people be very nice and say like, "Oh yeah, you can totally do this." So I believe in myself, and it's going well. So yeah, that's how my week is going so far.
Which part of it were you nervous about? Was it the guiding other people side of it?
The thing I ended up asking people about the most, I think, was the transition from like a role where you're actually drawing, like you're making art, you're sort of putting pen to paper, to a role where it's less drawing and more kind of. I've heard like. It's more like admin-y kind of stuff. It's like organizing people, having meetings, briefing people. But having said that, thus far, like, because it's still quite near the beginning of the series, we've only I can't say what the show is yet. I think I'm pretty sure I'm under NDA on that one because we're still near the beginning of production. I am doing a bit of design work myself as well because we haven't fully sort of filled out our team yet. So it's been nice. I've basically been like designing some stuff myself, and then I'm getting like a couple of people I know in to do like to complement me basically, which is really fun at the moment. But yeah, I wasn't sure whether that was something I wanted to do, but I decided that it was something I wanted to do, and now I'm doing it. So I'm trying it out for a little bit.
It is interesting. I've told you before we started recording that my wife is an architect, and in her firm, like one of the things that seems to kind of happen is like when you are coming up in an architecture firm, you're a drafter. So you're like actually doing the buildings and doing all the stuff like that. But as you move up, you have to start like leading people, and you don't get a draft all the time. And so one of the partners at her firm is always like, I want to do drafting stuff. And they're like, no, that's not your job. You can't do that. And I imagine it's, you know, it's going to take a bit as you kind of move up the ladder to get used to not doing things that you've kind of come to be known for. I mean, I'm trying to remember, did you won an Annie Award for Amphibia for your design for that show or for an episode?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for an episode of that show.
Yeah, you're going from being kind of, that's your thing, to now you have to help other people maximize that thing.
Yeah. I think it's nice because it does involve you kind of get to make more choices, more like you get to kind of make more creative decisions. Obviously you have to make creative decisions in any design role. Like if you're designing something, whether it's based on somebody else's sketch or whether it's just, you know, completely original, you have to make choices about like what that thing is going to be, but you get to make more of those choices in a directorial role. I think it's interesting actually. My wife is an animator as well. We have like very similar sets of skills. We met on the same uni course for like animation, but she specializes as an animator, and she's been in positions where she works on animated series as well, where they've offered her, because she's a really good animator, and they've offered her like more senior kind of animation director and like lead kind of roles, like supervisor roles. But she's kind of like, she's thought, you know, considered it, but she's turned them down, and she because she just likes drawing so much. She likes being given a task and animating a scene, and she's decided that's what she wants to do. And I think that's like a totally valid choice as well. I know from talking to people, I know that people, it's not like as soon as you touch that sort of, the more directorial roles, you can never go back and do like a design role again. Like I definitely know people who have art directed and then gone on to something else to do character design or whatever. I suspect that might be a nice thing to do as well, because one of the things I do a lot with my work is like I like to do one job where I have like a bit more responsibility, and then I also like to sort of alternate that with jobs where I have just not like less responsibility necessarily, but where jobs where I'm just being told to do the thing, and then I do the thing. That like I like that kind of work as well. So yeah, it's a mix.
I guess that's kind of one of the lines of demarcation between animation and comics to some degree, where it's like animation, you have to do it as a team. Like if you were trying to, like going back to like Amphibia or like the Owl House or something like that, if you were trying to one person animate that entire series, that would be either it would take your entire life or it would be the biggest debacle that's ever existed. But with comics, that's a singular task. That's something you have complete control over. I'm curious, is like when you're working on something like Cuckoo or like Homunculus or Harvest or something like that, what do you feel comics offer you as a storyteller that maybe animation doesn't? Does it like scratch a different itch for you creatively, or is it more about that freedom of being able to make your own decisions within your own stories?
I think it's that latter one particularly for me, because like I said, I try to, the last few years at least, I've kind of gotten into a pattern of alternating between a couple of years of animation work and then like a bit of comics work and then animation work and then comics. So I kind of flip from one to the other. And I think I enjoy the comic stuff. I enjoy because I do feel a bit more self-sufficient when I do it. Like I can kind of, I can make more, I can make more choices about my own, the stories I'm telling and the images I'm drawing. But that's kind of a double-edged sword as well, because I feel, obviously you feel a lot more pressure when it's just you making all of the decisions about something. Like it's kind of, I think comics are, when comics are being made by one person in particular, this is less of the case when they're being made by a team, which obviously there are like plenty of comics that are made by teams of people as well. But when you're making them solo, I think it's one of the kind of the amount of stuff that you're expected to sort of to do creatively is like really, it's kind of crazy, because it's like if you draw draw parallels between the things you're doing in a comic and the things you do at stages in an animation production, like you do the viz dev yourself, you do the thumbnails yourself, you do the storyboarding yourself, you do the cleanup yourself, you literally do like every, you do everything that in a big animation production would be divided up and given to, okay, this one guy's going to do the thumbnails and this one guy's going to do the cleanup. Like it's a lot more atomized in animation, which does make, which I'm not saying animation productions aren't ever stressful, but it certainly makes them kind of more manageable in my brain sometimes. Whereas with comics, it's a lot more like there's, at least with that method of doing them, all that load falls on kind of one person. Which is why I kind of want to experiment with doing kind of working in a team a little bit more. Like the manga model feels a little bit more like that. Like the way you have like an artist and then they have a team of assistants doing like the crowds and this applying the screen tone and stuff like that. And obviously you in Western comics as well, you have colorists, letterers, that kind of thing,
I think one of the interesting things about it too is it's not just atomized, as you put it, all the roles are split or all the roles are condensed into like one person. But the other thing is going back through Cuckoo and looking into like Homunculus and Harvest, it's one of the things I like about these books is they have like the kind of back matter, the character sketches and all the stuff like that. You can see how much thought and care and consideration you put into something like, what does Dorothy look like? And how does that character evolve? And you can see that character changed a lot. And so, I mean, on one hand, that's like a task, but the other thing is like, that's you getting it right because you're the only person who's deciding it. So there's more pressure, I think, in the sense that it's not just you taking on all these roles. It's also like every decision is yours. And so it's really important. Like you might feel more pressure from it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I definitely feel I feel a lot of pressure when I have to make creative decisions for myself, which then I think that's why I like to alternate and go to other stuff where somebody else is telling me what to do. But yeah, that's something we put into the the back of the sort of the current edition of Homunculus and the printing of Cuckoo that we just did was those things, because I think I've had people, like you just said, like sort of say that they like to see that kind of stuff, because I think I think especially with social media and posting art on social media and stuff, I think there's a bit of a like sometimes people just see I think it's perhaps unhealthy for newer artists or like less experienced artists to just see the finished stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's cool for them to see the sort of the stuff that happens further down the line. And this happens in like with animation pitches as well, like for like, because I've worked on, not personally, like I've never pitched a series. It's something I maybe would like to do, but I've never done it thus far. But I've worked on a bunch of them. And when you've worked on a few of them and you see them progress over the years, they change so much just by the necessity, like by lots of people sort of adding their input and stuff. And the final product is often very different from what the germ that it starts off as. And I think you see a little bit of that through those sort of developmental sketches. Like the story in Cuckoo changed a lot. A lot.
Well, we will get to that soon, but I did want to ask about how, I mean, I'm an outsider of the animation world. I don't know the specifics to it. When it comes to, you're saying you like to alternate the comic projects and you like to alternate it with with the animation and everything. Animation, does it tend to be more kind of project based, where it's like you'll do a season of a show and then I can take like 6 months off or 3 months off or something like that, and then you kind of bounce back into another show? Are you staying with kind of animation houses? Like how does the job work in that sort of way?
I mean, apart from, I guess there probably are people who are just like who are like salaried employees of like, say, Disney, who are just like there year on year. But I've never been in that kind of position. I've always, like, even for the longer projects, I still kind of see myself like as a freelancer, and I think I'm seen as a freelancer by these companies. So yeah, for like you said, for like a season of a show, Amphibia, we were really lucky in that we did the first season, and then 2 more got greenlit. So I got to stay on, and that was like three odd years of pretty consistent work. But like, I'm still feeling that out in terms of the reliability of that as like as a model, because I'm conscious it's worked for me for the last, like, I'm trying to think when I started, like 5-6 years. But the current environment for animation, for like animated series, seems to be a little bit less healthy than it has been in the past, maybe. I think especially with last year, with the whole like various mergers and Netflix kind of shrinking their animation down and things getting cancelled and stuff, there's less of like security, like a perception of security in these jobs. Jobs seem to be getting smaller and stuff. I think a lot of my, like I said, I've been doing this for like five years, like this specific like shows and stuff. I think a lot of my opportunities have been kind of luck based. Like this latest one that I just started on recently, I got contacted about like at the end of last year, like literally around the same time that I was like due to be finishing up on Cuckoo, like working on Cuckoo. Another job like offer came in, and the last few years feel like they've been full of that kind of serendipity where like things just happen to line up. So yeah, I'm very, I think I'm very lucky with this kind of stuff.
I imagine a lot of it too kind of comes down to personal preference. It's like some people might prefer the security of the salary stuff. You might prefer the flexibility of the current setup, but I mean, that might change too. Like context changes, situation changes. Maybe at some point you change your mind on that. But I am interested in, I mentioned, you've done work on Amphibia. You did work on the Owl House, which I have to say, the Owl House, I don't know how much you worked on that, but my niece was visiting last summer and she's obsessed with it. And she forced me to watch some very late season 2 episodes with her when she visited. And I was completely riveted. I had no idea what the hell was going on, like 75% of the time, but it was very enjoyable. But I'm curious as to how work on shows like that impacts your comic work. Like, do you feel working in those two mediums kind of alternating back and forth enhances and reinforces certain skills and helps you become a better storyteller in each at the same time?
Yeah, I think definitely Yeah, definitely. It's changed certain perspectives of mine on design. I think working with experienced art directors and showrunners, like Matt from Amphibia and Dana from Owl House, like the kind of feedback that they give me, like it was super helpful on the job. Um, and then I found myself when I was like taking that over to sort of drawing a panel for a comic, my mind would be thinking about the same stuff. It's like, oh yeah, if I showed this to them, they would say, oh, you should avoid that parallel, or you should have the legs separated here so that it makes a nicer silhouette, or stuff like that. So it definitely helps. And then yeah, otherwise, yeah, I think storytelling stuff as well, like because I got to obviously, like, one of the benefits of working on an animated show, even as a designer, is that you get to see, like, in I can't remember how many episodes a season, it was like you get to see those go from boards to animatic, and then you get to put your stuff in, and then you see the final thing, and you see the little things get changed along the way, like I was saying. And it feels like just seeing that many stories get told, even if it's like very different from the type of stories that you want to tell. I think it can teach you some, or you kind of get some principles about storytelling just through osmosis, I think. And I do think the writing on Amphibia in particular was like really, really, like, really good. I think they were really the writers on that show were like really good at crafting just like a little story each time.
A lot of what you're talking about is storytelling. It's like the way you ultimately tell story and make sure that certain things stand out. But do you feel like there's any stylistic impact from animation? Because I do think one thing that's interesting is it feels like there's a generation of cartoonists right now whose characters in particular are rooted in the look of animation. I am not well versed in where this like lineage began, but it feels kind of like Steven Universe and Gravity Falls type shows have like this character influence in there. Do you feel like animation, like both your appreciation and your work of it, like has impacted your art style at all? Like, can you notice any impact there?
It's maybe, yeah. I mean, it's definitely influenced it in that it's got me to think about it a little bit more. I think sometimes, like, there was one thing, like a random thing that I goes through my mind occasionally when I'm designing characters, is that when I was like younger, a little bit younger, I got really into the pattern of doing the kind of Simpsons things of designing a character with like one thumb and three fingers,
Oh
just because
yeah.
I quite like chunky hands, like fat kind of fingers. But that was something that they decided really early on with Amphibia, that they really wanted like four-fingered characters, like four-fingered humans. And now I find myself just naturally drawing four-fingered like people a lot more. I know it's like kind of dumb, but stuff like that. Definitely, like, Steven, you're definitely right on the mark with Steven Universe. I agree with you. I think that's like had a huge influence on the way a lot of illustrators sort of approach character design and comic book artists. I think that, like, Adventure Time,
Yeah.
there's that sort of lineage chart that goes around on Twitter occasionally, like tracing like, oh, artists from Adventure Time went to work on Steven Universe, and like I think the furthest back one is like Thorpe Van Orman, who did a show called Flapjack, which is like another one I really love Flapjack. But yeah, I think it's like efficiency of form, efficiency of lines and shapes, like trying to, with animation, uh, obviously economy is a really big part of it, of like, you can't have, like, if you look at like I don't know, like a sort of current Marvel or DC comic or something like that, you wouldn't be able to fit that much visual detail into a pipeline for like series animation. You just, like, there would not be enough time to do that and then have like a character that could fully move around and fully emote and stuff like that. So you have to kind of boil it back to its essentials. And they actually, with Steven Universe, that's a really interesting example, because if you've ever seen any of Rebecca Sugar's, sorry, I'm not on first name terms with these people. With Rebecca Sugar's work, she has this really specific way of like drawing with like, I think she uses like or a lot of the time she would use like brush pens and do like this really sort of slightly wobbly, slightly like everything looked like it was kind of made of plasticine in a really nice, appealing way. Like I think her like grad film is still on YouTube somewhere, and it looks like that. It's amazing. And then when they made the pilot for Steven Universe, they made all the characters. It looks like that. It looks amazing, like very kind of blobby, but also nice and anatomical as well, like really well observed. And then when clearly, I mean, I don't know what happened behind the scenes because I didn't work on that show at all. But clearly, between that pilot getting made and the series coming out, conversations must have happened about the feasibility of like maintaining that style. Because when the actual show came out, they kind of redesigned all the characters to be like much more simple, much more kind of like all the characters are made up of like simple shapes, like the heads will be like ovals and then like with a spike for a nose or for hair or something like that. And I think that's a good mentality to take over into comic booking as well, comic book making, because like your time is valuable and like if you want to make like a longish comic, like Cuckoo is my longest one so far. It's like over 200 pages, which for me is a lot. I wouldn't have been able to do that with like super complicated characters. So literally just for the sake of economy and my insanity, the colors and the line work has to be kind of simple, quite sort of stylizedly so sometimes.
I also think, though, when you have kind of more simple characters like that, it allows for much more expressive characters at times, because it's like when you have the simple shapes and stuff, I think it kind of conveys emotion and like intent and all kinds of different things in a way that sometimes the much more stylized and much more, I don't know, like the kind of like Western, I don't know, big two styled characters can. Like there's a purity there, and I think it helps a lot.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like stuff, because when I think of Steven Universe, for example, and I definitely do this a lot in Cuckoo, the like the neutral poses for like the faces are really like I was saying, like super stylized, super simplified shapes and stuff like that. But then whenever they cry or when they like grimace or whatever, it's like it kind of hits you even harder because it's like it looks so like shocking to see that character doing that expression. And I think I get a lot of mileage out of that in Cuckoo as well.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. The comics crowdfunding platform Zoop is stacked with some great campaigns in April, with Mark A. Nelson's fantastically beautiful sci-fi story Thunder Hunters, a wild project from up-and-coming Italian artist Marco Fontanilli that you'll have to see to believe, and the Won't Back Down anthology spearheaded by the legendary Trina Robbins to benefit Planned Parenthood. There are other live campaigns and some huge launches coming in May to sign up for, so check out zoop.gg for more. Takes less than 30 seconds to sign up, and the e-commerce style checkout is streamlined and intuitive. Add multiple rewards and add-ons into your cart, provide some info during checkout, and you're done. No confusing additional steps in finalizing your pledge, and no post-campaign surveys. For all of you creators looking to crowdfund your project, Zoop is currently open for submissions. Email them at hello@wearezoop.com to start a campaign. And now, back to the show. Dorothy, you feel her emotions when she's going through stress. You're just like, oh man, like I'm really feeling this. But last thing I want to bring up in terms of influence, I just want to give you a shout out. You had probably the three most unexpected influences mentioned, not unexpected, but an unexpected combination. You did an interview with Tiffany Babb over at Popverse, and you said that three of the biggest ones were cartoonist Chris Ware, manga, and an art book for Final Fantasy IX, which is I don't even have anything I want to ask about that. I just wanted to say that is an incredible combination. I love the art book of Final Fantasy IX part of it. It's just fantastic.
It's so good. Have you played that game, Final Fantasy IX, at all?
I have played that game. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super good. It's on my wife and I are playing through the PS1 Final Fantasies at the moment. We're like halfway through FF8, and I'm really looking forward to getting to FF9. But yeah, that book is so good. Again, video games, I think I may have said it in that interview, but like talking of economy of like shape and economy of line and stuff, if you look at those like early polygon kind of era of games, so like N64 and PS1, they were doing the same kind of thing where like they had to make the characters like a distinctive shape. Like if you look at Cloud from FF7, he's such a distinctive shape because there's like, you know, 5 polygons making up his entire body. Like he has to have that big pointy sort of hair, and yeah. So I think that's another good example of that kind of design.
So I came up on the Super Nintendo ones, like Final Fantasy VI is my favorite one, and then I'm like the weirdo who actually loves Final Fantasy VIII the most. I think it's because I was feeling big teenager emotions at the time, and Final Fantasy VIII spoke to my soul. But it is really funny to think about the simplicity of what you're talking about with that stuff. And then like I have art books because from the Super Nintendo stuff, and you're going from like sprite stuff to like Yoshitaka Amano's incredibly ornate super design stuff. And it is funny, like the contrast between those two sides. It's like the work that went into it to some degree is just the most beautiful, insane stuff you've ever seen. And it all has to be manifested as these tiny little sprites. And it still works. It works really well.
Yeah. I think I think it works in that same kind of thing with Steven Universe and the kind of the expressions thing where like you have this weird kind of thing where you have the box, like the Yoshitaka Amano like box art, and you know that that's what the character looks like, but then you see it on the screen and it's like just 6 pixels tall or whatever. But like the fact that you've seen the box art with this like beautiful watercolor gouache whatever painting means that when you look at that sprite on the screen, your imagination kind of fills it out, kind of, maybe. I don't know if
you're translating. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's get into the comics more. I did want to ask about the impact of creating a couple of shorter stories before getting into a full-scale graphic novel. Like, you absolutely could have, but I'm trying to imagine going straight into doing Cuckoo because it's like 200 pages. I think you kind of diminished that a little bit. That's a long book. I mean, that's not just a long for like an average person. That's just a long book. Did you want to baby step that to some degree before committing to like a full book? Like, was it important for you to kind of get your feet under you when it comes to like creating comics before jumping into a giant graphic novel, or was it less planned and just kind of how things worked out naturally?
Yeah, no, it definitely was. It was an intentional thing. So I started doing like my most recent kind of brush with comics making, because I tried to make them when I was a kid sometimes. Never really with any huge success. I think maybe it was because I tried to do a few of those like epic tales, page 1, chapter 1, you know, all this sort of thing is like planning out like whole book series kind of thing. And obviously that like it never, like when you're, I don't know, unless you're like a child prodigy, I guess that stuff never works. Or for me, it certainly didn't. And then when it was around 2011, like when I just out of uni, there's a newspaper called I think is it in the Observer or the Guardian? Like one of these two newspapers in the UK does a yearly competition where you submit like a 4-page short comic to them, and if you win, or I think if you win or if you're a runner up, you get like printed in the newspaper. And this is like it's like a broadsheet newspaper, so it gets like pretty big circulation. So it's quite a big deal. And I tried one for that. It didn't win, but they were like it got that kind of response where it's like, this isn't it, but we're really looking forward to seeing what else you do, kind of thing. And anyway, so that got me into the idea of doing like short stories, like contained short stories. So I did a few more of those in this series, this little kind of a couple of books that people might have out there somewhere called Omnipathy. I called it Omnipathy for some reason. And that was basically like a vehicle for me to write a bunch of short stories. Some were like sci-fi, some were horror. There was like a weird fantasy, like a fantasy one as well. Kind of the same sort of stuff that I do in the longer books. Yeah, they were like really, really good to do, I think. Like none of them were like more than, I want to say 20 pages long. They were all kind of like sub 20. And they were all kind of in slightly different styles as well. Like, because I at the time I was really like, you know, I was out of uni. I was like trying to find my voice because I was like, I don't know how to draw. So that was another really good reason to do like a lot of shorter stories, I think. I mean, I say a lot. There's only like 3 issues of that comic, and I yeah, I don't feel like I even did that many stories, but I certainly did a few. And then with the Hunter and Harvest, are the other two sort of short ones. Yeah, I think they're just good practice for the longer stuff. And then with Homunculus, that was like at the time that was my longest one. That's around 70 something pages, and that was like, okay, I can go up to 70. That's like, like gradually getting longer. And then with this one it was like 200, just because I kind of, after a certain point, I kind of stopped. Obviously I did like edit it down, like there was a lot of material that didn't get used in the book, but I kind of allowed myself to take as many pages as I wanted for like for certain moments, in a way that I think in a shorter story I would have just made like, I would have tried to sort of make like the bit where Dorothy touches the alien, the meteorite at the beginning. Like I maybe would have tried to like condense that down into like 2 pages or 1 page even, like in a short story. In this case, I just allowed myself to just let that scene take as long as it needed to take, kind of thing. And I think that's why it ended up so long page count wise. Because I don't think it's not really like a complicated story at all. Like it's still like just like 2 or 3 things happening in a sequence. And I don't mean that to like downplay it or anything like that, but I don't think it's not like an epic by any means.
I will say, I mean, I'm not going to go. I'll add one more question about the other books before we get into it. But one thing I did want to say about Cuckoo that I really love is that I went into it, I didn't really have expectations in a traditional sense, but I went in expecting X. And then you kind of gave me Y, and then it kind of became Z, and then it kept. So you had 2 or 3 things, but all of them kind of turned me completely. And I think that made it it made it seem much bigger in a lot of ways, but it's also very personal, and I think that really matters. But I had one thing I was just thinking of. This is kind of a random comparison. Have you ever seen the Futurama episode Jurassic Bark?
Yeah, with the dog. Yeah,
Yeah.
is that the one with the dog, or
It's
is
the
that
one with the
like?
dog. Yeah, it's the one with the
Yeah,
dog,
yeah,
and it's a very sad episode. At the end,
yeah.
it has this spoilers for an episode of Futurama that came out like 16 years ago, but actually probably longer. There was a sequence at the end where they were just like, oh, the dog probably found a new family and everything. Episode ends, and it's just like basically the dog sitting in the same place, and like the weather changing, and it's just like that the dog is constantly waiting for Fry, his owner. And it's got this really sad song playing over it, and you're just like getting punched in the gut repeatedly as you watch it. And it is kind of funny
Yeah.
because looking through Homunculus, and also particularly Homunculus, that's one of the things that I really appreciated about your work in that. And you talked about it with Cuckoo, is like you're able to kind of like stretch out beats and like make them, like the passage of time in Homunculus is like really important, and like especially when Daisy. Wait, no, what's the name of
Daisy. Yeah, I think it's Daisy.
Yeah. Daisy is like singing the song, and like you're just like seeing the world change in front of her eyes, and it's heart-wrenching. And like I think that's one of the things that even in like a 70-page book you were able to do that. Like you're able to kind of like make moments last longer, and you can see change there. And I don't know, I think you do that really, really, really well as a cartoonist.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that book was, or that sequence in particular was like really inspired by it. So the dog from Futurama was definitely an intentional, like that was the thing that I had in my head. I think particularly because there's the song, like Daisy singing the song.
Yeah.
Like, and there were like a couple of, I went through a few different songs before I sort of came on that one. I can't remember why I liked that one. I think it was just like, I don't know. It's a nice tune. But yeah, it was the Futurama episode, and also the there's like a couple of other things. There's a lot of stories that involve kind of not so much time travel as just like really huge quantities of time passing, and there's like an inherent kind of tragedy to that in a lot of cases. There's like something really tragic about like huge tracts of time, because it kind of renders these things that feel really important in the present just vanish into nothing, basically. Like I remember watching, I think particularly it being like almost like a time lapse thing was inspired by the original, like the old the Time Machine film, I think it's like from the 40s or 50s. I wish I could tell you like the director or the sort of actors in it, but I literally cannot remember off the top of my head. But it had like basically a Futurama-esque scene where like a guy travels on a time machine through into the future, and you literally see all these like the sort of, it's in this shot in creepy stop motion, so like the sort of the buildings go and like, you know, ruin, and then he stops at some point and there's like a nuclear war going on and there's like mushroom clouds in the distance and stuff like that. I just found that really terrifying as a kid. So that was the thing that was inspired it. And also I'm trying to think of something else. There's an anime, going back to the sort of anime / manga, there's an anime called Gunbuster, which is like, to all extents and purposes, is like a pretty standard, well, not, it's like underselling it. It's a on its surface, it's like a standard kind of giant robots versus space aliens kind of anime, but it has like, because it involves like space travel and stuff, they actually try and do some kind of realistic, you know, time dilation. Do you know what that is? Like when you travel close to the speed of light over vast distances, general relativity means that time passes slower for you than it does for the people back home. So when you get back home, everyone you left, in this case, they basically go off to the alien planet to sort of defeat the aliens and save the world, in the knowledge that they know when they're going to come back, everyone they knew and loved is going to be dead, but they do it anyway, and they win. And then they come back, and the final like frame of the anime is them coming back to the Earth, and like the Earth has like basically like a bunch of cities have been like lit up to spell out the words "Welcome Home" on the Earth's surface, and it's an image that stuck with me, and it's so sweet. It's like, you know, it's hundreds of years have passed or whatever, so it's like all the people they knew before are dead, but they obviously had it, you know, they passed it down the generations, like, oh, remember when you see a spaceship in the sky, we've got to light these buildings up so that we spell out a thing for them. And it's really sweet as well, because they've it's in Japanese, but they've like slightly misspelt the word as well. They've like spelt one of the letters backwards, so it's just really sweet. But so it's that kind of vibe.
Yeah, it really works. And I mean, you're very good at kind of doing the same thing in Cuckoo. Obviously, you don't have like extended time frames in the same way, but let's talk about Cuckoo. It's your new graphic novel over at ShortBox. Here's the solicit for the book for everyone that hasn't read it yet. Dorothy Weaver is an anxious 19-year-old still living at home with her mother and failing a vocational art course when memories of his mysterious childhood events start resurfacing. Something about a meteor in the garden. Now, she and others have begun manifesting strange powers. Are these powers a gift or a curse? Psychic phenomenon or mass delusion? Either way, Dorothy is changing. But into what? I absolutely loved it. I called it, as I told you before, the first truly great comic I read in 2023 in an article recently. I mentioned before about how I love the story just taking turn after turn after turn. It really, really, like, it just kept me on my toes. And by the end, I was like, dang, this is a hell of a thing. I just want to ask, like, about its origins. Like, where did Cuckoo come for you?
So it came from, it's been floating around in my head for quite a long time, like since the early 2010s. I think it was a combination of things. I was reading a lot of John Wyndham at the time. John Wyndham's this English author who I'm kind of referencing quite heavily in the title itself, because he wrote a book called The Midwich Cuckoos. I don't know if have you ever heard of that?
Mm-mm.
It's it was adapted into, I think it's called Village of the Damned. You know, the film about, it's set in England, and it's set in like a small village in England where basically everyone falls asleep for like a day, just falls unconscious, and then they all wake up the next day, and then 9 months later a bunch of blonde, blue-eyed, like psychic children get born, and they're the cuckoos, they're from space. So I was like, and that he also did a book called The Chrysalids, which is about psychic kids as well, and just like a general interest in stories about psychic children, kind of just aesthetically, but also as a vehicle to talk about like the kind of, when you have these sort of slight adolescent feelings going through your brain, the idea of them somehow affecting the world is quite sort of a tempting idea to think about. It's like a cool idea, I think. And then the other thing that influenced it was the fact that we lived down the road from this. Like, I just love. There's like a few visuals basically in it that were like in my head really early on. One of which was there was a pylon, like an electricity pylon, just down the road from us, and it was in the mid. It was like in the middle of a park, and you could literally like you could climb over a fence and go underneath it, kind of thing. I'm pretty sure you weren't supposed to do that, but like there's something about them that I find really like. I found really like that. I basically had the vision of something to do with psychic kids, something about them living in London, and something to do with a pylon, and then kind of everything else, pretty much everything else in the comic just came out of the process of writing it. Like there were a lot of ideas that came to me as as it was going on, like literally as you're drawing a page, like, oh, this could happen. Oh yeah, of course, like that would be a good idea, kind of thing. And that tends to be how kind of stories happen to my brain rather than coming in fully formed at the beginning.
Is it just kind of like the merging of a disparate ideas into one larger idea, basically?
Yeah, I think we were at a signing the other day because we actually did a couple of signings for this, which has been really cool. And somebody was asking that kind of like completely understandable question of like, how do you get started writing a comic, or doing an animation or whatever? And like one of the it's a really hard thing to do. And one of the only pieces of like kind of good advice I feel like I can give about it is like having you have like a few, like there's a few things when you start out writing something, there's like a few things that you're like, okay, I really want this one thing to happen. You can really vividly imagine like this one scene or this one sentence or this one color or something like that. And you have like you almost you could map them out on like a board, like Pepe Sylvia style. And then you have those moments, and then a lot of the process of writing for me is just like finding a way for them to sort of come together cogently, basically. And sometimes you'll put two of those moments together, and like a third thing will occur to you. So yeah, it's about drawing those moments together, basically, for me.
I have to ask, this is a quick sidetrack. How was the signing, and where was it?
It was good. We did one in Gosh in London, which is like a big comic book shop in Soho, which I really...
It's an amazing shop.
Yeah, really, really recommend it. They're lovely there. That went really well. And then I did one... I've done signings there before, but the second one we did up in Leeds, which is a city I don't know as well, but it's near where my publisher is based. And we did it in a small a shop called Colors May Vary, who are like a bookshop. And yeah, that was really, really fun as well. It was smaller just because Leeds is a smaller city, but it's still cool. I really like doing like I don't do many signings specifically, but I do like tabling and just like getting to chat to people about stuff. But like at cons, we do a lot of like comic conventions in the UK. Mm-hmm. That's something I really enjoy. But yeah, it went well.
Gosh is a great shop. I love the fact that the upstairs is like the most beautiful kind of bookstore type graphic novel shop you could ever expect. And then you go downstairs and it's like also like a kind of American, or the single issues all over the walls. And then there's like the long boxes in the middle. It's a nice fusion of the different types of shops. But and now a quick word from one of our sponsors. It's Bad Idea Comics, and surprising absolutely no one, the renegade director-retailer publisher that's always doing wild things is again doing wild things. Not satisfied to just drop comics like Matt Kindt, Ramon Villalobos, and Tamara Bonville's They're All Terrible, or Matt Kindt and Louis LaRosa's Megalith the old-fashioned way, they've continued to drop their Secret Six titles, or comics they make incredibly difficult to find by being sneaky about it, with Playtime, a new comic from the great Mike Carey and Jonathan Weishak that they dropped at Comics Pro. What might be next? Who knows? It's Bad Idea. They're crazy. Keep an eye out, or you might miss the next Bad Idea comic altogether. And now, back to the show. One thing I think is really interesting about Cuckoo is the fact that it's a superpowers book. And it's like, it's a medium that for a lot of people means superpowers. But it is kind of funny because ultimately it's about superpowers, but it's not about superpowers, if that makes sense. It's like a kind of a jump off to understanding Dorothy as a character and understanding all these different things. Do you feel like that, whether it's for like Homunculus, where you have this like AI, or you're a 19-year-old with newfound superpowers, does a lot of, when you're kind of combining these disparate elements into a larger story, is a lot of that work come down to finding a way to connect this larger fantastical idea with like, specific emotional and thematic ideas that are of interest to you. Is that your approach, or is it a lot more natural than that?
That's definitely what I'm trying to do. I don't know whether I don't know how like actively I'm thinking about it.
You're not just like writing themes down and stuff like that as you're doing it?
No, because I have tried doing that, and sometimes I try doing that, but it always feels a bit kind of nerdy to be like, the theme of my book is going to be this, and then like writing that down, and somehow talking about it directly too much as you're making it, for me, I get kind of embarrassed about, and it never works. Whereas like the themes that arise just kind of seem to happen a bit more naturally. I will say for this book, Zainab, my publisher, was definitely like, I think they're a bit of a harder sell on, not a hard sell necessarily, because I think they trust me to like, write the kind of stories that are going to work for them. But like, I think they were a little bit, is it just like a superpower story, like a sort of power fantasy story? And I think that was something really early on that I decided that I really didn't want to do, was like, because I mean, this is obviously the sort of psychic kids genre, if you can call it that, is like there's a lot of stories that are around those themes of like teenagers getting these powers,
right?
Some level of angst, some level of conflict. Like Akira, I obviously really love. I'm trying to like Mob Psycho more recently, another Japanese one. But I wanted to do something that wasn't just kids get powers, they have a fight, and then they're like blowing up buildings and having chucking cop cars and stuff like that. Like, because a lot of them end up like that. Like, I really like the what's another one? The Chronicle, that film that came out a few years ago. It's like, they're good films, but one, I don't want to say like if you've seen one, you've seen all of them, but like it's kind of like a lot of them cover the same ground.
Sure.
And I wanted to do a story about psychic kids that kind of went a different way. Like I specifically went in with the goal of not having a big fight happen towards the end of it, and it being more about like the main character's kind of mental state. I think sort of helps it be like that story. With this one, I think more than any of my other comics. So when I was a little kid, I really liked sci-fi fantasy comics. Like, those were the first comics that I started kind of reading. And then I kind of got out of them for a little while. And then when I got to uni, I started reading them again. But the ones I was reading then were like, they are sometimes derisively referred to as sad boy comics. Kind of like, I mentioned Chris Ware in that interview. Like, Dan Clowes at the time was really big. Chester Brown. A lot of these, mostly North American cartoonists who are writing like a lot of autobiography. Like, I was obsessed with autobiography. I still really love autobiography comics. A lot of them with like kind of a melancholy to them. And I think one of my goals for a while, and I think at least from my metric, I feel like I've done a job of it in Cuckoo, is like having both a story that is like about big crazy sci-fi stuff, but also about like sad people being sad and anxious. That was like a kind of intentional thing in writing this one.
Do you see a lot of yourself in Dorothy, or is it more just like she's the character that guides us on the journey, and she's not necessarily representative of you?
Yeah, no, she's the character with the most amount of me in her than in any other story that I've written. This is like the most. I don't want to be like David Lynch being like Eraserhead's my spiritual movie, but this is like my most almost autobiographical like story that I've written, I think, in a while, bar the the aliens and the psychic powers and stuff. Like, a lot of the stuff that I chalk it up to kind of the whole thing of write what you know kind of thing. Because I'm a lot better nowadays. I think it's based on me kind of circa early to mid 20s. I was having a lot of the same issues. I still have anxiety to a degree and depression, but back then I was a lot more anxious. I was having panic attacks, and the thing that she describes of having like blind spots in her eyes, that is something that happens to me. And it's like a medically documented thing. I talked about it on Twitter once, and I had like so many people say like, "Oh, I have that exact same thing." So it's like, but you never hear about it. Like, They're called they're called ocular migraines. I think sometimes they're called like scintillating scotomas or something like that. They're like literal. It's just it's a thing that some people, when they get migraines, they get like blind spots in their eyes, and if the first time it's happening to you, you're like, and you don't know about it, you're like, oh my god, I'm going blind. What the hell is going on? And it's the most horrible thing ever. But yeah, I went to like a hospital and got it checked out and stuff. So yeah, there's tons of me in that book. I feel like I've gotten with this book. I feel like I've gotten a lot of me, my brain stuff off my chest now. So I feel like the next one I write can be like about something that feels very different. I feel like I'm liberated to write about something a bit more fantastical next.
Do you feel like all of that is part of the reason why Dorothy went through such an evolution in terms of look, in terms of like how she was going to be in the process of developing the book? Because there's a lot of different sketches of Dorothy in the back of the book, and I'm sure that there are more. Do you feel like it was very important for you to get Dorothy right in a very precise way?
Yeah. I think a lot of that had been because, I mentioned that the idea had been floating around in my head for like, years. And I think a lot of it was because of that, basically because this idea has gone through so many like permutations over the years. I'm pretty sure I sent my publisher the first like sketches, like the first ideas for like pre-pandemic, like 2018-ish, like around then. And I think and just by necessity, there's going to be a lot of change in in designs over that amount of time. A lot of it is actually to do with story reasons, honestly. Like this is one thing that happens with character design, or certainly with me, is that I design, you write a story, you design some characters, and then the way you design the characters kind of influences the story. And then the way you write the story, you might rewrite a bit of the story, and then that influences the characters and stuff like that. So in some of those sketches, I think that there's like a big page of the sketches in the book where they look like young, like way younger, and that's because for a long time they were going to be like school aged children, like sort of 15-ish, and that was going to be a thing. But then we ended up changing. We sort of ended up aging them up because it's like when you're that sort of uni age, it feels like there's a lot more kind of legitimate things. Like you're kind of a little bit more reliably informed about like the world and your status in it at that point. So I think there's a lot more to sort of, empathize with getting anxious about. Another thing, my dad pointed this out. Like he was like, "Oh, I really like that drawing in the back with like the big crystal thing above, like sort of appearing above her in the bed." Similar, that kind of change. That was how I wrote it originally, but it ended up changing just because of the way the story kind of ended up getting rewritten over the time. I don't want to go into it too much because it's a bit spoilery, and because the ending of the book is a little bit like, whoa, okay, and I kind of want it to be that way.
I mean, that does bring up, I'm curious about your process because you do a lot of very interesting things with page layouts in particular in Cuckoo. Like, I love how you incorporate like geometric shapes and designs, like very unusual page layouts that kind of match the nature of the object. I don't even know what you call it. The star, the thing that lands.
Yeah.
You incorporate a lot of geometric shapes and designs into it, which are very important to the plot of the story. But there's also like, there's a page early on where you have like a very surprising moment laid out like an exclamation point, which is just really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is the layout phase a pretty important part of your process? Or do you, I mean, you might not even have one. I guess I'm assuming, like, I guess what is your process from, like, do you script out and then go into layout phase and everything like that? Or do you have something that's way different?
So the way I write generally doesn't involve scripting. Like a text-only script doesn't really happen. It kind of did this time, but only I kind of wrote it after the fact, so that it was easier for my publisher to edit. But normally, I will like scribble a bunch of stuff down in a sketchbook, and then immediately go to just like thumbnailing stuff, and immediately starting to think about kind of the arts, the layout, like the panel layouts, and the script, like the text at the same time, and just like really, really like embarrassingly scrappy like thumbnails. And I had that, and yeah, really early on I had the idea of like, okay, the majority of the comic is going to be like, standard square, I try and because I've seen people make fun of the sort of the 3x3 9 panel grid a little bit.
Sure.
I still really like it. I think it works sometimes, but I try and make it do some adventurous things when it's like that. But it's relatively standard. And then for all the bits where there's stuff to do with these aliens, I was like, oh, it would be fun to do some like thing where you're every like the panels go from that to like that, they kind of get rotated into these rhombuses. A lot of that's, I mean, I think honestly that's one of the things I feel like I'm not as adventurous. I could have gone a lot more adventurous with it. I mean, obviously when you finish something, you're always thinking about what you could have done better with it or done differently with it. But I feel like that's something I want to push more in future books, because I've seen so many people do such amazing things with like wacky panel layouts. Like manga they get away with such insane pages, and it's like, how does this work? How does this read like nicely? But it does. In terms of page layout, yeah, I guess I try and figure it out pretty early on, but then everything changes like all the time, all the way up until like the last pen stroke on the Wacom tablet, like before I hit like render. Like I think that one that you said looks like an exclamation mark. I think I only had the idea of making that like, because before that was just going to be like a column, and then I ended up making the column kind of truncated at the bottom so that it was like kind of looking slightly in perspective almost. And then I was like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have like a close-up of Dorothy on this page? So then I put like a little panel of her at the bottom, and then I was like, oh wait, that looks like a little exclamation mark. And like stuff like that sometimes happens just by serendipitously, but yeah, it happens as you go along, I find.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's nice to how you do it, like when like when the panels turn and they become rhombuses and stuff like that. It's like there's little moments where the kind of fantastical really starts bleeding into the story. Like the first time Dorothy meets Ellie, who is a character who has powers as well, she like pokes her. Actually, there's two different things that she does that I think is really nice. There's narration in the book, and you start getting Ellie's narration in there, and Ellie makes the choice to change the color of her own thought bubble because it's confusing otherwise. And it's really interesting how I don't know, it's like there's a mind that changes the formal decisions that you make in the book, and it's a really nice touch. But the other thing that I was going to point out was when she actually first physically makes contact with Ellie, there's like a panel that kind of people can't see this, but it juts out to the right and has like it becomes like a half regular panel, half like rhombus panel as we're talking about. And it's really interesting to see how the powers and all these different elements, the roots of it start impacting the actual formal parts of the process, or the layouts and everything. Because when those parts start appearing more, it starts kind of changing the storytelling, and I think that's just really cool. You did a great job with that.
Oh, cool. I'm glad. Yeah, it was just the idea of like making those bits feel more alien, like something weird is happening. I don't know, like sensorily something weird is happening. Like there's a couple of moments in the comic where the panels like them kind of fracture and break and crack a little bit, and there's like, that's definitely not an idea I came up with. Like I really like Frank Quitely does a ton of really nice stuff with those like having panels kind of break and crumble and stuff. But just limiting it to those moments, I think, makes it like shocking when you see it, and it's like, ooh, you can kind of feel it a bit more, I think.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, because a lot of people I talk to who make comics talk about how valuable constraints are from a storytelling standpoint. And it's interesting because you could have went much more buck wild with those page layouts, but the fact that you constrained it to just these types of moments make it a lot more interesting. I also want to say that like I'm trying to think of, this is too much of a spoiler. I don't really think it is, but it's
okay.
It's interesting how it feels like all the choices you make are very consequential. Like when early in the book, like a third of the way through, Dorothy and Ellie go and see John Carpenter's The Thing when they're off gallivanting during the book. And the funny thing about it initially was I was like, what a random choice of a movie for them to go see. And then I finished the book and I was like, it kind of feels like the perfect choice now. And it's interesting how there's like little elements in it where it just feels like a flourish, or maybe it just feels like this random thing, but ultimately ends up being this like a nod. I'm just going to put it like that. You also did a very good job of recreating a rather gross scene from The Thing in the book. So
I that
it was great.
that shot, like, yeah, no, I mean, I put that in there because that is one thing that I don't know if it made me like throw up, but I definitely saw that like probably out of context just on like a TV show or something when I was a kid, and just like there's something about the way that puppet looks of the guy, like this, for anyone who hasn't seen the film, it's like a guy. The film is about a shape-shifting alien that can turn into people, and when it's discovered, it just reverts into like this weird, like fleshy mass. And it's like it's this guy who's actually the alien, who his head is like wrenching itself off of his body, and it's just like, oh, like even like I don't know whether maybe it wouldn't have an effect on like today's teens or whatever, because it's like very obviously a puppet. But
I watched it not that long ago, and I mean, I've watched it a number of times, but my wife walked downstairs and it was like the scene where the dog was turning into like the weird spider thing and killing all the other dogs. And she like walked downstairs and then just like immediately walked upstairs, like Abe Simpson in
yeah.
yeah. Anyways, it was just kind of amazing. But just a few more questions. I did want to ask about Ellie really quick. She feels incredibly important, both because of her plot contributions and because she just brings a completely different energy to the story.
Mm-hmm.
What made her a necessary addition to the book?
So I really wanted, actually, like in the this is another example of the story changing a lot over time. The initial draft of it, which I think is like kind of a more interesting story in some ways, was going to be like they meet through the internet, because I kind of had this idea that like maybe the fact that they were like, because I had internet friends sort of growing up, and the idea was that they like somehow their like psychic powers like used the internet and like reached out sort of that way. But I ended up sort of dropping that just because it basically it simplified things in writing it, which again is like economy. But I think I kind of wanted it to be about a pair of like a friendship. I feel like most stories, most good stories tend to be about, or like that I like, tend to be about a dynamic between two people, or like focusing around the dynamic of the two people. I feel like having one character, that you can definitely write a story about one character and have it be like interesting enough. Like that's definitely sufficient sometimes, but I just think just like seeing the differences, the similarities between two people can be just makes for a bit easier over time in terms of writing a story. And also I think I kind of like, so if you take the perspective, which I kind of do, that Dorothy is kind of is, I don't know what the right word, neuroatypical certainly. Like I think she would probably, I would imagine she would be diagnosed with some kind of anxiety disorder, because I feel like it's kind of, it goes beyond, you know, the regular amount of anxiety that a person would experience. I think I wanted to show somebody else who kind of has had the same experience, but has kind of taken like mentally taken like a different sort of route with it. I actually kind of want to do at some point like maybe a little addendum to the story of like, because I do feel like you know, Ellie kind of comes out of nowhere in the story, and you find out a little bit about her, but she's kind of still off to one side. I kind of want to write a bit more about her. Like I kind of want to write about like what she's up to in her life when she sort of meets the alien. But yeah, I think it's important to have that contrast between them. Basically, I think as well, it's like it's a thing you get in media about like a sad or a neurotic character, like you know, Evangelion. Do you know Evangelion at all?
I'm aware of it, but I haven't actually watched it.
Yeah, so it's like about a little, like basically the main character in that is a bit of a sad sack, and people get tired of him. And I think it's important to, I think if it was just Ellie, if it was just Dorothy being like, "Woe is me, I'm very sad" for the entirety of like the book, then that would get a bit tiring. Basically, I think you need some contrast against that as well.
I also don't know if Dorothy would have gotten there without Ellie. like would have gotten to, like, just because it's like she kind of coaxes her out and takes her to places, and it's like when she starts kind of embracing, like exploring who she is, that's when she kind of finds, I don't know, it is kind of interesting because like there's like to a certain degree, like Ellie is much more comfortable and confident in who she is than Dorothy, and like kind of functions a little bit better because of that. But it's like to a certain point, and then Dorothy becomes the one who's kind of got the self-actualization, as Maslow would appreciate it. But it is interesting to see how they kind of bring the best out of each other. But speaking of that, I mean, speaking of bringing the best out in you, I did want to ask about ShortBox. I love ShortBox's releases. I mean, the books are great, but also the production value is off the charts. Like, the books look good and they feel good.
Yeah.
You've been publishing there for a bit with Zainab Akhtar, editing your work also. What made ShortBox the right home for you?
So Zainab reached out to me. I can't remember. I think this was like, so she's been like she's like known in the UK scene for years because she used to do like comics journalism, comics and color, comics criticism sort of stuff. And I remember reading her reviews of stuff there, and I remember really liking them. And just, it was the kind of thing where, it's like somebody who you kind of pick up when you have a lot of the same sort of tastes in as people in comics. It's like, oh yeah, you like that thing and I like that thing, and you kind of, you notice when that happens like a bunch of times. And then I think there was like there was some planned comics collaboration thing that was going to happen at Thought Bubble one year, which is, Thought Bubble is like a big UK convention that happens in Harrogate, which is up north. Which didn't, it fell through, but I think shortly after that she started ShortBox, and she sort of messaged me about she literally messaged me about getting in touch, and I was like, yeah, this sounds great. This was like at a point where I was doing mostly animation work at the time. Probably if I hadn't done that, I probably would have just continued pottering around with my own like shorter self-published stuff. But I think the fact that it was for a publisher, there was a deadline, there was a fee, etc., meant that it kind of emboldened me to try something a little bit longer, which is why Homunculus was a bit longer than the previous ones that I'd done. And obviously the format before with ShortBox was that they used to do, I think, 4 a year of these like boxes, and it's not a subscription thing. It was just like one, you pay for each one individually, and it was just like a box of comics that had been specifically written for that box, with like I think there was always a print in there, and there was maybe some stickers and stuff as well. So I did mine, and it was kind of like, one and done kind of thing. They moved on, and then a couple of years later, Zainab sort of wanted to get a bit more into like publishing larger books, like publishing like standalone books. And then that's when we started talking about the idea that would later become Cuckoo. But then, and it's still going now. Obviously, you can still go on the site now and order it, and they ship pretty much worldwide, I'm pretty sure. I think they may be going out through a distributor as well, so they might get even better sort of distribution this year, which would be great. But then, as you're probably aware, the stupidity of Brexit has taken a toll on a lot of like smaller businesses in the UK, particularly when it involves like mailing stuff overseas. It's so much more of a faff now to mail things, even to mainland Europe. I mean, America was always a bit of a faff, but like mainland Europe used to be dead easy and quite cheap, and now it's just like so much more expensive and so much more like paperwork you have to do for it. So I think, I mean, I wouldn't want to talk for her, but like I think that's the main reason behind ShortBox unfortunately closing up its doors at the end of this year. But I think they do have a few more books that are going to be published this year. So just, I guess your listeners should be aware that those are going to be the last few. So if you want them, definitely, when you see the Kickstarter go live, back it as soon as you can.
Yeah. I mean, it has been an amazing run, and it's such a bummer. I mean, I'm in Anchorage, Alaska, and I can confirm that ShortBox does ship as far as Alaska, which is pretty far.
Wow. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the shipping stuff is just so painful, and I can't even imagine what Zainab has to go through with that. It's a nightmare. But to close, I did want to ask you, like, we talked about how doing the shorter books first kind of helped you figure things out. But you have the experience of putting together a full-length graphic novel, 200 plus pages, a doozy, one that evolved on you a lot. How do you feel that changed you as a cartoonist? Like, do you feel like you learned anything about what you want from your own comic work from that experience?
I think each time I do one, it's the same. Like you do learn stuff, like process wise. I think you learn stuff, but at the same time, I kind of approach, and maybe this is a flaw, but I feel like I approach each book, each new project, as like its own thing, because I think, like, trying to think of the right way to sort of put this, but like I'd learn for it, but I've only kind of learned, like, okay, this is a thing that I did, and then I want, like, the thing that I'm always interested in, like, is what I can learn from the next thing. Like, I want to try the next thing, basically.
Yeah.
Like, at the moment, I'm planning another. I'm doing the ShortBox. One thing that is going to be continuing, I believe, in the ShortBox related, is the ShortBox comics fair. The
Right.
ShortBox, is that what it's called? Like the
I believe it is. Yeah.
ShortBox comics fair.
Is it November, October?
October. So it's
Yeah.
in the month of October every year, at least for the foreseeable future. It's an online only, like an online only comics fair, where basically ShortBox gets a bunch of different authors to contribute a book, and they can be like usually on the small side, so it's not like a huge investment. They sell them through, I think it's Squarespace, and I'm doing one for that, and I'm trying to do, like, at the moment I'm trying to do something without, like, sort of spoiling, because it's very, very early days still, but I really want to do something slightly interactive for that, like involving bits of animation and stuff like that. Something that you could only do with, like, an online comics fair, basically. So, like, I feel like I've learned stuff from doing Cuckoo. Maybe about, like, time management and planning, maybe, but, like, it's not like, yeah, I'm not like, I wouldn't want to just do the same thing again, but more, if you know what I mean. I kind of want to do, like,
Yeah.
a different thing next, basically, if that
I
makes
mean,
sense.
that seems to be pretty consistent for you, though, because it's like, Homunculus helped you understand things, and then you're like, I want to go a little bit longer this time. Then maybe this time you're like, I want to keep pushing myself, but how do I push myself without, like, length being it? And then now it becomes, like, about interactivity. And I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that kind of every project, maybe you don't have specific, like, ideas of what you want to be, but it's kind of like, by doing something, you've scratched that itch. Now you're like, what's the next itch? What's the next thing I want to do to kind of excite myself as a storyteller?
Yeah, that's how I would put it. And I usually, and the downside of doing that is that pretty much every time I feel like I do a comic, I feel a little bit intimidated by it early on, because it's like, it feels like there isn't much of a, like, it's not like I'm doing, like, crazily new experimental new things each time. Like, obviously there's like a bit of an underlying framework there, but I still feel like I feel kind of inexperienced in comics. Like, when I'm starting a new comic, I feel really inexperienced. I feel like it's like I haven't done that many of these, and I certainly haven't found, like, maybe it's a grass is greener situation, but I certainly feel I look at other artists more, like artists who are sort of, for whom it's a more consistent form of income and who are a bit more prolific, and they certainly make it look easier, or like they have an easier time with it. I don't know if that's probably not the case.
I mean, it's kind of like what you were talking about earlier with people who see, like, the finished art for, like, animation and stuff like that, and they compare themselves. I mean, I think, yeah, it's the grass is greener. It's like people always compare themselves to others. I mean, I think it sounds to me like, to some degree, creatively, I always kind of view myself as I view it in Mario Kart terms. I presume you played Mario Kart at some point in your life.
Yeah.
When you do a race and then you, like, do the race again and you race against a ghost of yourself.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm always trying to beat the ghost of myself. I'm trying to win the ghost race against previous me, and it seems like that's kind of what you're doing. But Joe, you're doing a very good job of it, because Cuckoo's amazing, Homunculus is amazing, Harvest is amazing. All the stuff you do is great. But thank you so much for coming on to talk about all of it here on Off Panel. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, it was super fun. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Joe Sparrow. You can find him on Twitter and Instagram at @torpordust, and his work in Cuckoo at ShortBox. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Darcy Van Polges, Kevin Bides, Tom Evans, Natalie Mockery, Travis Gibb, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian, Christo Ray, Near Levy, Dennis Hoffman, Jason Hussa, Cancel Comics, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Beachy, Ben Damstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Brian, Submen Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Massell, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Nick Bennett, Birdcage Comics Cafe, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Stephen Hall, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Chris Pachala, Torrin Grumbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Chris Rata, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Nick Polito, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Adam Highfill, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Voltpack for letting me use their song Outro as the song's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out both their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.